it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. The Group Home Massacre. The man with the disfigured face watched the group home from a bush, his hands bored tightly into fists, his heart racing, his breath coming in quick, hot gasps. The house stood warmly lit against the darkness, a thin trail of smoke curling from its brick chimney. In the falling snow, it reminded him of postcards he'd seen. Merry Country Christmas, maybe, or Happy Holidays. Hatred surged through him. Years ago, he lived in that house, and it was not a happy home. It was home to delinquents, truants, and incorrigible teens. Cruel, vapid, sadistic teens. The man remembered the taunting and the beatings, the fear that came with lights out, when other boys would come into his room and hurt him, the long, desperate, tear-filled nights. At 17, he left the group home in a broken heap. The intervening years were cold and joyless. His hatred grew until he could no longer contain it. And then, he came back. In his coat pocket was a knife, and jammed down the front of his pants was a long screwdriver. Those were the weapons he wanted to use, up close and personal. He wanted to look into their savage faces as they died, to watch the life drain from their eyes. Presently, the back door banged open and 4 boys piled out. He crouched lower, concealing himself. Through the wind-driven snow, he could catch only snippets of their conversation. "Code for this," one said. "Come on," another replied. "Fun." He watched as one of the boys turned his back, covered his eyes, and started counting. The others scattered, fleeing into the field behind the house. One, overweight and huffing, holding his pants up as he ran, headed right toward him. The man pulled out the screwdriver and gripped it in his frozen hand. The boy reached the bush and pushed through it, shaking it. Panting, he dropped down next to the man, without seeing or even sensing him, and craned his neck to peer through the branches. 30, 31, 32. The boy was 13, maybe, the same age the man had been when he came to the group home. He remembered the angst and fear, the hormones, and he could practically smell it rolling off the boy in stomach-churning waves. The man shifted, and the boy turned his head. 38, 39. The man grabbed the boy by the back of the head and rammed the screwdriver up through the underside of his chin, through his mouth and into his brain, his tongue tacking to the roof of his mouth and his skull cracking like a soft-shell crab. Kicking his feet and making strangling noises as blood filled his lungs, the boy's eyes widened. Gritting his teeth, he twisted the screwdriver, and the boy went limp. 45, 46. The man was shaking. He closed his eyes and fought to catch his racing heart. The coppery smell of blood hung heavy in the air, and he licked his lips. 50. Ready or not, here I come. Bending over the supine body, the man pressed his lips against his neck and drank greedily of the rich blood. He pulled back and let the hot liquid work through him. And an idea struck him then. Taking the knife from his pocket, he took the boy's head in his lap and worked quickly. When he was done, he took the wet skin and stuck it over his face. Gotcha. The counter was there, his head in the bush, a look of triumph on his mulatto face. The man grabbed him by the chin and rammed the knife into his ear. He didn't have time to scream. When he was limp, the man dragged him into the bush and heaped him on top of his friend. Emerging from the bush, he tucked the screwdriver into his pants and looked out over the field. Plenty of places to hide. Ready or not, he called out. Here I come. Tracy Franklin sat at the counter and watched bemusedly as Roger and Libby bumped into each other. At one point, Roger, tall and lanky with glasses and a goatee, threw his head back and looked like he was ready to grab the old woman. You're in my way, Libby, he said shortly. Oh, hush, Libby said. She grabbed an empty pitcher from the counter and shuffled over to the sink. Shaking his head, Roger opened the oven, bent down, and took out a tray of cookies. Libby poured tea mix into the pitcher and filled it with water. Holding it now, she turned around and bumped into Roger again. "God damn it," he yelled, nearly dropping the cookie sheet. "Watch your mouth," Libby said. Roger, who everyone suspected was gay, practically lived in the kitchen and was fiercely possessive of it. Though Libby or one of the other staffers always cooked dinner, Roger was constantly making tea, cookies, brownies, anything he could get away with. One time Dave even got him to make pot brownies. "Oh, you can't have any of these," he told Jan, the other staffer. "These are our special brownies." Jan, who was 70 if she was a day, put her hands on her hips. "Fine, you probably ruined them like you ruined the last batch anyway." Roger had held up his plastic spatula and glared. "Just get out of my kitchen." "Ooh, what smells good?" Katrina Jett asked, coming into the kitchen. Short and tan, her black hair spilled down the shoulders of her pink t-shirt. She was wearing extremely short shorts and socks, and Tracy rolled her eyes. "Cookies," Roger said. He had the sheet on the range and slammed the oven door. He dropped the pot holders next to the sink and went to the fridge. A radio Tracy suspected hailed from the 1890s sat atop it. "Why aren't you working?" Roger asked and slapped it. It came to life, music filling the kitchen. Libby sat the pitcher on the counter and turned, her eyes widening when she saw Katrina. "What are you doing, young lady?" she asked. Katrina grabbed an apple from the basket in front of Tracy and took a bite. "Getting a snack." "Go put some clothes on," Libby commanded. "There are boys around." Katrina, who was already leaving, looked over her shoulder. "I know." Tracy laughed. "Ah, slut," Roger muttered. "Roger, I'm going to write you up if you keep talking like that." "It's true, Libby. She prances around half naked and shakes her butt. I'm surprised she's not pregnant yet. Whose bright idea was it to combine the group homes anyway?" There were 2 group homes in Barronsville, both affiliated with the United Lutheran Children's Services organization. One was for boys and the other was for girls. The girls' group home burned down at the end of November, and the bigwigs simply transferred the girls to the boys' home. They didn't have to deal with it. The staffers on the ground, however, knew what was coming. After all, it was inevitable, wasn't it? Randy boys and girls thrown into the same house. Whoever would have thought, right? Tracy heard whispered rumors that Tiffany and Stacy had both had sex with one of the boys. A different one, Tracy assumed. And though they hadn't really done anything yet, Tracy and Dave were close. Her stomach fluttered when she thought of him. He was so tall and handsome, with blue eyes and a sly little grin. Tonight, maybe, she thought, imagining herself slipping into his bed after lights out. One of the night staffers came around with a flashlight every 45 minutes to check on them. Surely they could be done in 45 minutes. Tracy knew she could be. "Not mine," Libby said now, shaking her head and shuffling off to the dining room. "You don't like having us girls around?" Tracy asked, putting her face in her hands and blinking her eyes prettily. "No," Roger replied, scooping cookies off the sheet and onto a plate. "You make too much noise." "Oh, I think you're just worried about competition." Well, he shot her a dirty look. "You can get out of my kitchen, too." "Going," she said, hopping up from the chair. Beyond the kitchen was a wide dining room. Off to the right, a door led into the office. Ahead, past another threshold, was the living room, lit by the warm spill of a table lamp. Tracy paused in the doorway and glanced from the TV. Once upon a time, show the girls had gotten the boys into, to the couch. Dave and Bob were engrossed in the show. Bob, small and weasel-like, creeped Tracy out, but Dave liked him. Stacy sat in the armchair, her feet pulled up underneath her. Blonde and petite, she was wearing a white t-shirt and checkered shorts. "Where's everyone else?" Tracy asked. "Kat and Sean are upstairs," Tracy said without looking away from the TV. "And the others are playing hide-and-seek." "Well, so are Kat and Sean," Bob said with a sly grin. You're thinking of Hide the Sausage, Dave said. Yeah, you guys are gross, Stacy said. Oh, Bob looked at her. You weren't complaining the other night. Well, Stacy glowered at him. Shut up, nothing happened. So much drama. But Dave was so fine. Biting her bottom lip, Tracy went to him and dropped into his lap. Hey there, he said with a smile. Hi, she said, her heart pounding. He smelled of cologne and aftershave. Oh, what you doing? Watching TV, he said. Oh, she teased. Season finale, he nodded. You? She shrugged one shoulder. I was thinking of going upstairs. Maybe go to bed early. Dave's eyes widened slightly as he caught her meaning. One thing about him, he wasn't dumb like most teenage boys. I'm kind of tired too, he said, faking a yawn and stretching. Go on then, Stacy said. You're being loud. Tracy smiled at Dave. You want to go? Sure. And she took him by the hand and led him upstairs. He found the third boy crouching in a trench. The man tackled him and beat him about the face and head. The boy shouted and tried to fight back, but the man's thirst for vengeance made him strong. When the boy had lost consciousness, the man slit his stomach open with the knife and ripped out his entrails, steam rising from his gaping chest cavity. The man remembered something he'd read once about a fur trapper in the 1840s who killed Indians and ate their livers as a sign of contempt. Digging his hands into the dead boy's guts, he ripped out the liver and ate it. And when he was done, he made himself vomit onto the ground, and then ate it again. He was thinking of doing it again when he remembered the fourth boy. Getting to his feet, he wiped the blood from his mouth and went off in search of him. The field behind the group home was bordered by a low-end shopping center whose crowning jewel was a Save-A-Lot. From here, he could see headlights on the highway running past it. He remembered looking out his window as a child and thinking that while the world was so close, it was so far away too. When he finally found the fourth boy hiding behind a pile of brush, he was surprised to see that it wasn't a boy at all, but a girl, maybe 13 or 14, with a plain face and long brown hair. She was petite and wore a black hoodie with dark jeans. They were letting girls in now. Oh, she was so absorbed in watching her front that she didn't see him creeping up to her side. He stepped on a branch, and she snapped around, her eyes going wide. Bitch, he growled as he launched himself at her. Uttering a small squeal, she struggled to her feet and ran, heading straight toward a stand of trees, and then angling toward the house. Realizing her route, the man went around, meeting her as she passed and slamming his fist into her face. With an oomph, she collapsed to the ground. The man straddled her back, grabbed a fistful of her hair, and yanked. She screamed and sobbed. Your fault, he said, his heart rate accelerating. Oh, your fucking fault. Please, she cried. Please, stop. Grunting savagely, the man had an idea. He brought the knife around and started sawing on her scalp. Oh, she howled with pain. Luckily, the wind rose, covering the noise. When the scalp came off in his hand, he tossed it aside and admired the top of her bloody skull. Bits of flesh and strands of hair stuck to the bone, the former soft and quivering, the latter flipping in the wind. The girl struggled under him, crying. Taking the screwdriver out, he jammed it into her head with such a force that her skull cracked and split. Throwing the weapon aside momentarily, he dug his fingers into the fissure and pulled, as though she were a crab and he a hungry tourist. The girl shrieked. The bone broke, a piece coming off in each hand. Now her brain was revealed, pink and throbbing, little clouds of steam wafting into the frosty air. The fight had drained out of her. Using the jagged ends of one of the skull pieces like a tortilla chip, he scooped out a wad of brain and stuck it into his mouth. As the tremors of excitement passed, he briefly considered assaulting her, but decided against it. The thought repulsed him. It So instead, he shoved his hands into her cranium, removed the rest of the brains, and plopped them onto the ground. Standing, he kicked them, his foot catching in the goo. He slipped, went down hard, and barked mad laughter until he cried. Tracy locked Dave's bedroom door and turned. He was lying on the bed, his arms behind his head, a sly smile playing across his face. Tracy's heart caught in her throat. He was so beautiful, he might even be the most beautiful thing in her life, like ever. When she was 3, her mother ran off with a guy who worked at a car wash, leaving her alone with her father. People would whisper that he used to be a good guy, but all through Tracy's childhood, he was drunk and mean. As she grew older, she suspected that he resented her for what her mother had done. He'd always say, "You're just like her," whenever she did anything displeasing, and how she tried not to. Well, she was 14 the first time he hit her, catching her in the chin with a closed fist and driving her to the kitchen floor. She was 15 when she decided that she'd had enough and ran away. She sometimes imagined him sitting all alone in the trailer, nursing a beer and muttering to himself about both of them leaving him, and she hoped he was sad and miserable. The police found her 3 days after she left and put her in a shelter. She was there for 6 weeks. Most of the other kids were nice, though there were a few that had problems and caused trouble. And from there she came to Barronsville. She was surrounded by 6 other girls, but felt totally and utterly alone. Now, looking at Dave on his bed, smiling at her, she felt, what? Hope? Joy? Love? She didn't know exactly, but she knew it felt good. "Oh, you're sexy," Dave said. She blushed, her heart going pitter-patter. "Do you really think so?" "Yeah." She went to him and sat on the edge of the bed. "I don't think I am," she said with more than a hint of truth. She was too skinny, her brown eyes too big, her reddish blonde hair too short, barely reaching her shoulders. She didn't know why, but it wouldn't grow longer. Sitting up, Dave looked her in the eyes with an intensity that scared her. "You're wrong." Put his hand on the back of her neck, and Tracy sighed. It was so warm and gentle. Then they were kissing, their tongues darting coyly into each other's mouths. Tracy had only kissed one boy before, and she thought it was gross, his slimy tongue caressing the insides of her cheeks. But with Dave it was different, electric. Her hair turned to jelly, and her heart blasted against her ribcage so hard it was almost painful. She ran her fingers through his hair as he laid her down. His hand slipped inside her shirt, his nimble fingers grazing her. She felt herself dampen. He moved closer, kissing her neck and nibbling her ear. She gasped and exhaled, and he worked lower still, unzipping her pants. For a moment, something like terror fell over her. This was it, she realized, her big step into womanhood. What would Dave think of her body? Would he like it? She covered her eyes as he slid down her pants. Next, he hooked his fingers into her underwear, and those came down too, the feeling of the fabric moving against her fevered skin exciting her even more. She opened her mouth to speak, to ask Dave what he thought. But she got her answer. She jumped, a tingling thrill running up her spine. "Oh," she sighed. It was all she could muster. The tides of pleasure were rising up around her, threatening to sweep her away. Long tendrils of crackling sensation crawled up her body. Gasping, she grabbed handfuls of sheet and bared her teeth lest she cry out and someone hear. While outside, the wind moaned. Covered in blood and panting, the man crept to the back steps and paused, listening. When he was satisfied that he was alone and unobserved, he crouched down and picked his way up the concrete steps. Amber light fell through a window in the door. Peeking in, he saw the kitchen. Ancient striped wallpaper, cracked yellow linoleum, outdated appliances. It was exactly as he remembered it. The countertop was the only thing that had changed. In his day, it was tan, and now it was green. A boy in a pair of jeans and a green apron was rifling through a cabinet over the sink. The man tried the knob. It was unlocked. Taking the knife out, he turned the handle and slipped inside, the warm air caressing his icy face. Wipe your feet, the boy called out without looking. I don't want dirt and mud in my kitchen. The man closed the door behind him and turned the deadbolts. The boy stopped what he was doing. Libby, where are the sprinkles I bought? The cabinet, a voice called back. Libby. An image of the old woman's sunken face danced through his mind's eye. Her hooked nose, the mole on her upper lip, her beady eyes. She reminded him of a bird, maybe a buzzard, perched on a branch and waiting for something to die. Oh, she had to be in her late 70s. God, why wasn't she retired yet? Was Jan still here too? As if in answer, the boy let out a long sigh. Jan, my sprinkles. I don't know, Roger. You need to keep track of your own things. You're a big boy. Hatred coursed through the man. Jan was a freaking tyrant. She would walk through the house and make sure that everything was perfect. Beds had to be made with military precision. Chores had to be done twice. If your clothes were wrinkled or your hair unruly, she'd make you go back to your room and try again. If you so much as blinked while she was talking to you, she'd write you up and you'd lose all of your privileges for days, sometimes even weeks. No TV, no going outside, no hanging out in your bedroom. You were to sit at the dining room table and twiddle your thumbs, or, if you were lucky, do schoolwork. The man hated Jan. From the moment he came to the group home, the old woman had something against him. Maybe she didn't like his face. Maybe it was his voice. Who knew? He sure didn't. But when he came to her about the other boys bullying him, throwing blankets over his head after lights out and beating him in the face, shoving him and tripping him, she ignored him. She didn't care. And a grin crept across the man's disfigured face. Oh, he was going to enjoy killing her. Shaking with anticipation, the man started into the kitchen. Sensing him, the boy turned, his expression going from put upon to terrified. Pouncing, the man swept the knife through the air in a deadly arc. The tip sliced the boy's throat, the skin parting like the Red Sea. Gasping and gurgling, the boy raised his hands to his throat and stumbled back against the counter, blood cascading down the front of his apron. The man grabbed him by his apron and stabbed him in the chest. The boy's face paled and he went limp, falling to the floor with a loud thud. Roger, what was that? Jan called. The man looked up just as Jan came out of the office. She saw him, jumped, and stopped. Stepping over the body, he went for her, raising the knife. Frozen in fear, she didn't move, didn't speak, though her mouth worked soundlessly. Remember me, the man whispered. Jan's eyes were wide, her wrinkled face agog. With his free hand, the man pulled the dead boy's face from his own. Remember, Danny Prince. She jerked as if shot, her hand flying to her chest. A loud, low moan escaped her lips as she fell against the doorframe. You're... Jan? Libby asked worriedly. Jan's eyes rolled back in her head. She slid slowly to the ground. Oh my God, Jan! Libby appeared then, bending over the dying woman. The man raised the knife and brought it down, burying it in her neck. She hissed and fell, and then was still. Jan was dead too. But the man wasn't happy. He was looking forward to killing her, but she robbed him of even that. He knelt down and put the knife to her throat. He was about to push it in when he heard a whisper coming from the living room. Oh, that's nice. Don't stop. More victims. The man took the knife away from Jan's throat, wiped it on his pants, and got back to his feet. Peeking his head into the lowly lit room, he saw a boy and girl making out on an overstuffed couch. The boy had his hand down the front of the girl's pants and was kissing her neck passionately. Her head was thrown back, eyes closed, and lips parted in bliss. The man entered the living room, moving with the stealth of a cat. He was standing over them now, so close he could smell the musk of the girl's desire. What if we get caught? She panted. I don't give a fuck, the boy replied, biting her ear. She giggled. Neither do I. She opened her eyes then, and saw him, and screamed. The boy turned. The man brought the knife around and sank it into the soft flesh of his cheek. The girl screamed even louder and rolled off of the couch. The man pulled the knife out of the boy's face and stabbed him in the chest. The sound of the front door opening brought him out of his reprieve. He darted into the foyer, past the stairs and out of the door. The girl was halfway to the road when he grabbed her from behind, spun her around, and dropped her onto the frozen ground like a WWF wrestler. The wind knocked from her with an audible gasp. Bitch, slut whore. He wrapped one hand around her slender, pulsing throat and squeezed. Oh, she scratched his hand and kicked her legs. He brought the knife up and down, and the wind shrieked for her. Sean Harker lay back against the bed and closed his eyes. On top of him, Katrina Jet bucked and thrusted, her pretty little breasts flexing. He gripped her hips and rolled his neck. You just don't give up, do you? Well, they'd been at it for almost half an hour, and in that time, she had orgasmed maybe 6-7 times. Sean himself 3, which he supposed was impressive for a dude. Well, 4 was the most he'd done in a day. Of course, that was by himself. But having this sexy girl naked on top of him, he could probably go another time. Oh, she was so good, so good. He wanted to do it again inside her. Not for a kid, just to feel it. And she thrust 2-3 times and then collapsed on top of him, shaking. Her pleasure pushed him over the edge, and he pulled out just as he reached the mountain. For a moment he lay still, like his body was jello. Katrina was still trembling. She laughed. Jeez. Sean said, suddenly very tired. I'm going to go to the shower, okay? Do whatever you want. She smiled and got up, gathering her shirt and her panties. Maybe come join me, she said over her shoulder. Maybe, he replied, rolling over. When she was gone, he reached into his nightstand drawer, took out the leather-bound Bible he kept there and opened it. A hole had been cut through many of the pages to accommodate a pack of cigarettes. Sean's window opened onto the roof, and he often went out onto it and smoked. He figured he'd have one now, join Katrina, and see if he had enough for one more time. She wouldn't be here forever, so bust it while he got it, right? Sean took out a cigarette and got his lighter from its hiding place between the mattress and the box spring. He was just getting up to put it on his pants when his bedroom door, which Katrina had left ajar, pulled closed. Forcefully. Hey, Ben, is that you? Ben was Sean's roommate. 13, fat and pimply. He was actually a cool kid, but still, you couldn't trust anyone. Well, if he saw him and Katrina... Slipping the cigarette and the lighter into his jeans pocket, Sean went to the door. That you, Ben? Just going out to smoke. Want one? And he opened the door. To the left, past several bedrooms, the bathroom door stood open. The sound of the shower and Katrina humming drifted out. He turned right toward the stairs, and a man was there. What the... The man grabbed him by the throat and lifted him up. Hey, man, let me go. He threw a punch, hitting the man in the side of his scarred face. What the fuck? Suddenly, he had a knife. Sean's eyes widened. Hey! The man jammed the knife into his stomach. He then squeezed Sean's throat to cut off the scream. In the shower, Katrina Jet lathered her supple young body and let the hot water sluice over her. She hoped Sean hurried up. She was starting to feel horny again. Sean, you coming? A moment later, she heard him come into the bathroom. There you are, she said. You coming? I'm ready. No reply. Only heavy breathing. She let the water run over her face and then poked her head out. A man with a horrible, misshapen face greeted her. Before she could scream, he jammed his finger into her eye. She wailed as the orb popped and began spilling down her cheek. She reached out, grabbed the shower curtain, and the rings holding it to the rod broke. She fell, watching in horror as the mashed remains of her eye stuck to the tip of the man's finger. As soon as she hit the shower floor, the man was on top of her, the water beating down on him, his head and shoulders black against the overhead light. When he stuck the knife under her ribs, she cried out. Then the knife was entering her good eye, and darkness reigned forevermore. After making love, Tracy lay with her head on Dave's chest, listening to his heartbeat. His arm was wrapped around her shoulders, and she felt safe and at peace. Safer than she'd ever felt at home, with her abusive father and her absent mother. She told Dave this, and he squeezed her tighter. He didn't speak, though, but that was okay. Just having him there, feeling his warmth, was enough. Later, fighting the temptation to sleep, she asked, "Are we a thing now?" "Of course," he replied instantly. "Why wouldn't we be?" "I don't know." She did know. She was afraid that she was just a lay for him, a quick squeeze and release. Though she didn't mind the idea of casual sex, she didn't want that from Dave. She wanted more. She wanted someone to have and hold, even if only for a little while. "You're my girl," Dave said, reassuringly, and she kissed him. "Oh, it's going to suck when they finish rebuilding the other group home," she said, settling back. "I know. I won't have you here. We can visit each other, though. It's not far." The girls' group home was 2 miles across town, and that wasn't bad, she told herself. They could bike to each other, or even walk. "I'm about to fall asleep," Dave said, getting up. "If they find us sleeping together, we'll never get to see each other again." Tracy sighed. He was right, she knew that. But being under the covers with him was bliss. "I have to pee anyway," she said. She pulled on her pants and her shirt, and Dave got dressed too. In the hall, Tracy heard the shower running from behind the closed door. She knocked gently. "Hello, I have to pee. Do you mind if I come in?" No answer. Damn. She knocked again. Still didn't hear anything. Oh well. She opened the door and went in. The toilet was separated from the shower and the sink by a half wall. She went to it and froze. Katrina sat on the commode, her head twisted at an impossible angle. Both of her eyes seeped blood and other less nameable fluids. Horror rose in Tracy, erupting in a scream. Dave was there in an instant. "What is it? What's wrong?" Tracy tried to tell him, but she couldn't speak. It's Katrina. She..." The shower curtain fell from the rod, and a man stood inside, tall and horribly disfigured. He was wearing a suit and holding a knife. Dave spun around just as the man came out. Shorter than the man, but more muscular, Dave threw a punch, connecting with the man's face and sending him back. "Come on," Dave screamed, grabbing her by the hand and dragging her out of the bathroom. He slammed the door and held it. Tracy was breathing heavily, her heart beating so fast that the world was going grey around her. The man was at the door now, trying the knob. When it wouldn't budge, he slammed against the wood, and then the tip of a knife rammed through, inches from Dave's face. "Come on." He let go of the door and ducked away. Tracy followed, only turning when they were at the head of the stairs. As she watched, the man ripped the door open and emerged, a screwdriver in his hand. "Hurry!" she screamed hysterically, pushing Dave. At the bottom of the stairs, Jan hung from the wall, her chin lolling against her neck. She'd been tacked in place with a marble rolling pin. Tracy screamed, and Dave gasped. The man was coming down the stairs now, and Tracy felt faint. Grabbing her by the wrist, Dave led her into the dining room. Libby was spread out on the table like Thanksgiving dinner, various knives, forks, and other sharp instruments jutting from her body. Dave led her around the table and into the kitchen. When she saw Roger's head sitting on the stove, acrid smoke rising up around it, she screamed again. The man was right behind them now. Dave pushed her toward the back door. "Run!" The man hit the kitchen just then, and Dave threw himself at him, driving him back. Tracy was frozen in place. "Go!" Dave screamed. Her paralysis broke, and she went to the back door, grabbing the handle and turning. It was locked. Shit. Behind her, Dave screamed. Tracy was panicking now. She clawed at the lock. "Damn it, why wouldn't it work?" "Open!" she shrieked. "Open!" She looked over her shoulder, and her heart leapt into her throat. The man was coming into the kitchen, his shoulders squared and his jaw set. In that second, she saw his face clearly. The ugly scars, the ruined eye, the drooping lips. He was a study in terror, and Tracy screamed again. Somehow she found the deadbolt and threw it back. A snowy gust of wind ripped the door from her hands and slammed it against the outside wall. She flung herself out into the night, the accumulated snow cold against her bare feet. Behind her, the man let out a wordless cry of fury. She turned as she reached the doorway. He paused a moment and then gave chase. In the front yard, she hit something in the snow with her left foot, a rock maybe, and hot agony snaked up her leg. She turned again. The man was coming, but slowly, like a killer in one of those stupid old movies, like he was relishing the moment. When she turned back around, her stomach lurched. The car was moving slowly along the road, its headlights cleaving the storm. She gave out a yell and raised her arms, but the man caught her by the back of her shirt and threw her against the ground. She screamed, and the killer kicked her, the tip of his shoe connecting with her diaphragm and knocking the wind out of her. White light burst on the edges of her vision. Panting now like a boy touching his first breast, the killer turned her over and straddled her, slapping her across the face. "You bitch," he hissed, wrapping his hands around her throat. Snow stung her eyes. She lashed out, hitting his ugly face, but he didn't move, didn't relent. The world began to fall away from her, growing fuzzy and warm. The fight drained from her, and she realized that she was dying. Tracy Franklin hallucinated as she sank into the void. Saw flashing red and blue lights. Saw the man look up, afraid. Saw him fall back as bullets slammed into his body. Saw the worried face of a cop hovering over her. And then she passed out, never expecting to wake again. 2 hours later, she did, in a hospital bed. Dave, his arm in a sling, was sitting next to her. The man lied in a heap on the hard ground, snow falling over him, his life draining from 7 bullet wounds. How the cops got involved, he didn't know. Maybe someone heard screaming and called. Maybe they just happened by. Either way, it was over, and he had avenged himself. As he flirted with the edge of death once more, he thought back to his last day at the group home, the day some of the other boys had set him on fire, the day Libby and Jan weren't watching, the day they took him out of the group home in a body bag. With that vision firmly in mind, the man died. Again. So yeah, a little bit more extreme than I usually go, a little bit more bloodthirsty and a little bit sexier as well, to be honest. Typical slasher narrative. I quite enjoyed that one. Thought it was a bit of a roller coaster ride. Good Friday evening's entertainment. Am I wrong? If so, tell me. Let me know in the comment section below the video. And as ever, I will do my best to reply to as many comments as I can. Yeah, getting a bit better. You can still probably hear it in my voice. I'm a bit under the weather still. Bit croaky. Well, I always sound like this, though, don't I? So, not much difference from normal. We'll be back on Sunday. Had big plans for this evening, but because of the voice, they've been put back a few days. So, yeah, you can expect something from me on Sunday evening as well. Hope you're enjoying the podcast over on the other channel. A new one went up last night. Ghost stories. So, if you're not sure, description in the Link in the description. Well, that's enough for me for one evening. Back again very soon. Until the next time, very, very sweet dreams and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.